All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are looking at the gritty reality and the really dark history of the top 15 most dangerous cities in the United States based on their 2025 homicide rates. We hear about national crime trends all the time, but when you look at the hard numbers at the city level, it tells a completely different, honestly kind of terrifying story. So think about this. What actually happens when you cross the invisible line? Because in a lot of these cities, daily life hums along beautifully, right? You've got quiet residential streets, amazing restaurants, thriving downtowns. That is, until you take a wrong turn. You cross this invisible line where the violence isn't just constant, it's dangerously compact. It literally just boils down to where you happen to be standing on the map. We're going to break this grim dossier down into 5 chapters today. We've got the illusion of safety, divided by invisible lines, digital traps and paranoia, structural danger in history, and finally, the true crime capitals. Let's kick things off with Chapter 1, the illusion of safety. Okay, looking at the data for cities 15 down to 11, we've got places like Norfolk, Virginia, hitting a homicide rate of 16.5 for every 100,000 people. Now, Norfolk actually hit its lowest overall rate recently since the 80s. And Detroit, sitting at 17, boasts this completely revitalized, fabulous downtown. But their violent stats overall, still incredibly high. And that's because the danger is hyper-concentrated in ignored pockets. Rounding out this group, we have Cleveland at 18, Louisville at 19, and Milwaukee at 21. This brilliantly highlights how safety in cities like Milwaukee and Detroit has essentially just become a zip code privilege. You could live in one neighborhood totally convinced the city turned a corner, investment is up, everything's booming. But, venture just 5 miles away, they're still waiting for that corner to exist. The violence is violently trapped in impoverished zones where opportunity literally never reaches. And the dark history of these areas is just chilling. The danger has incredibly deep roots. I mean, we're talking about everything from Donald Miller's horrific Michigan attacks back in 1976, where he was stabbing victims and falsely claiming multiple personalities, all the way to a massive breakthrough just recently in January 2026. That's when forensic evidence finally solved the brutal 1987 double murder of 2 young people, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, near Norfolk. They finally identified Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. as the killer. Moving on to Chapter 2, Divided by Invisible Lines. So as we break into the top 10, we see a steady escalation in the numbers. Indianapolis hits number 10 with 22 homicides per 100,000 residents. Then Richmond, Virginia comes in at 23. And Kansas City, Missouri jumps up to 25. The numbers are definitely climbing, and the stories behind them are getting way more complex. Take Richmond, for example. It looks totally polished with the beautiful James River and the renovated downtown. Actually, Richmond has a surprisingly low overall violent crime rate, like 6% below the national average, but their murder rate specifically is stubbornly high. It's like things escalate straight to the extreme. Meanwhile, Indianapolis slid so rapidly into danger that the city is pretty much constantly reacting instead of steering. And Kansas City? Their violence is growing quietly in the background while the national spotlight stubbornly stays glued to places like Chicago. All right, Chapter 3, Digital Traps and Paranoia. What's fascinating and horrifying here is how modern paranoia and digital anonymity birthed entirely new kinds of monsters in these specific cities. Take Kansas City. It famously became the hunting ground for John Edward Robinson. Operating under the screen name Slave Master, he is the first known serial killer to ever use internet chat rooms to lure his victims. He's 82 years old today, sitting in prison for 8 murders. Moving up to number 7, we've got Philadelphia, sitting at 26 homicides for 100,000. But the danger here isn't just tucked away in impoverished neighborhoods like Kensington. Back in 1996, extreme wealth and absolute paranoia collided when eccentric millionaire John DuPont totally shocked the nation. Driven by sheer paranoia, he murdered Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz right on his massive Foxcatcher Farm estate just outside the city. Just a wild, tragic case. Let's dive into Chapter 4, Structural Danger and History. The spike in the data right here is severe. We hit Birmingham, Alabama at number 6 with 28 homicides. And then we've got a tie for numbers 5 and 4, Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, both sitting at a staggering 36 homicides for every 100,000 residents. In Baltimore especially, it's just the stubborn plateau of violence that endless programs and leadership changes just haven't been able to fix. Looking closer at Washington, D.C., It's a city of terrifying extremes. You can safely tour the monuments, walk the National Mall, right? But venture into the wrong neighborhood, and you hit extreme poverty and structural violence. The resources in D.C. are aggressively hoarded by the insulated, affluent areas, leaving the other neighborhoods completely to fend for themselves. Before we cross that invisible line into our final, most dangerous cities, please take a quick second to like, share, and subscribe to this explainer. It really helps support our deep dives into the data and keeps these investigations coming.
Ma'am, do not get out of your car here. It's very dangerous. That is a genuine warning a local resident gave to a tourist who was just trying to walk to the Civil Rights National Monument in Birmingham. It perfectly captures the everyday reality there. This is a city with an incredibly dark history, including the tragic 1963 KKK bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And decades later, the streets surrounding that very monument are still considered dangerously volatile. All right, we've reached the climax of our dossier. Chapter 5, The True Crime Capitals. Coming in at number 3 is St. Louis, Missouri, with 38 homicides per 100,000 residents. And at number 2 is Memphis, Tennessee, with 41. In both of these cities, people aren't just experiencing statistics. They're living through intense, violent patterns. The danger is so heavily concentrated, it forms the structural baseline. It seems totally immune to any standard civic reforms. And Memphis carries a brutally heavy history right alongside those modern numbers. I mean, it was the tragic backdrop for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It saw the absolutely horrific 2008 Leicester Street massacre where 6 people were killed in a brutal home invasion. And just across the river, it was the focal point for the infamous West Memphis 3 satanic panic case. The history of publicized violence here is incredibly dense. But sitting entirely in a league of its own, the number 1 most dangerous city in America for 2025 is New Orleans, Louisiana, delivering a devastating 46 homicides for every 100,000 residents. Behind its worldwide reputation for jazz and Mardi Gras and endless celebration, New Orleans hides a truly macabre lineage of bloodshed. We're talking about the unsolved, terrifying Axeman serial killer who literally broke into homes and taunted the city back in 1918 and 1919. Then you have a 1982 murder by the prolific drifter Samuel Little, all the way up to the horrific 23-victim spree of Ronald Dominique, the Bayou Strangler, in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the really crucial point to take away from this explainer is this: joy and danger coexist here without canceling each other out. In places like New Orleans, celebration and deep, life-threatening peril exist on the exact same block. They are separated by absolutely nothing but an invisible line that locals know all too well, but tourists often walk right past. As we close this dark case file, the stark data leaves us with one haunting thought. If violence is this deeply rooted, structural, and clustered in specific pockets of American cities, what will it actually take to redraw or even erase those invisible lines for good? Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and stay safe out there.